Greetings and welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I am Ray Russell. We are returning from a brief hiatus, a brief vacation, if you will, and we jump right back into things where we left off, picking up Bob's time in the Florida territory, circa 1986. Bob the Booker. At that point in time, we're going to hopefully cover more of the names that Bob encountered during his time frame there, and a whole lot more. You never know what Bob Roop's going to get into here on the program. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's welcome him back. Here he is, Bob Roop.
Well, it's good to be back. We've been chatting a little bit off there. I miss having a chance to reach out there and share things with our listeners. I recall when we started, there was some hostile response. They had been listening to people for years knocking me, and with no response from me. They had to be believing, well, I've been hearing it for like 20 years that Bob Roop is a real crumb bum. He must be, because he's never said a word in response. And now that we've had a year, and plus it was over a year now that we've been able to respond a little bit and give, a little different version of the way things happen.
Right.
Maybe we've lost some of our more negative viewers are saying, well, maybe Bob is not the devil after all. Maybe he's just a jerk. Anyway, either way, if you're out there listening, I appreciate it. If you're chewing on your steering wheel right now, just at the sound of my voice, as long as you're listening, it's okay with me. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's funny when you say that too, in regards to it's kind of the way the reception was up first, which it really wasn't that bad, to be honest with you. But as time has went on and as you've been able to tell stories and kind of let people see who Bob Roop really is, a lot of that has went away. And that, I think that's great that we've been able to get that out there and kind of say, no, see, he doesn't continue to steal McDonald's and Burger Kings and things of that nature today, as he stole the wrestling territories way back. No, it's great, but it's good to hear your melodic vocals there. And hearing you use the word crumb bum, I just heard that like in a 1950s movie the other day, so you're really dating yourself there, Bob, but I loved it. So, crumb bum. That's I haven't heard that word in decades, and I've heard it twice this week now, so it's funny. I don't know.
Yeah, well, you think of a joke. If I was a Siamese twin, I'd have a steady date, wouldn't I? But then it would be sort of the incestuous. I wondered about that. Anyway, I'm no reason to go there. I'm weird enough without going.
I'm not going to Google that joke. I'll let that one.
No, that's no going to. But yeah, it's nice. And now, of course, my attitude now for listeners out there who might be analyzing what we're saying, my attitude is different now. Of course, years have passed, and they've been good years. I've been raising my children, and my two youngest sons and I are still together in a home, and it's been a happy life. Losing their mother and my dear wife was a blow, but it took a while. Her departure took three years, so we had plenty of time to say goodbye. And bittersweet as it was, it didn't come as a shock. At least we had plenty. But it's a good life. And the thing, and another thing, in the wrestling business, it was impossible not to make enemies, especially as a booker, because if you picked one guy over another to be the main event, all the other guys in the cars would be saying, "Oh, I'm better than that guy," or whatever. And I can understand now, looking at it from a wider range of information, from my own experience of having worked with guys like Tarzan Tyler, for example, going way back early in our get-togethers, where to me it was no big deal. And then, and plus he does a job for me, he pushed me over. And then I find out later he's worked with people like Bruno Sammartino or somebody famous, and been a champion or been a real draw somewhere. And, because I didn't have any information about, as a rookie, I didn't have any information, and there was no Facebook yet, there wasn't the internet yet. So there was no way, the telephone was the way you found out about things. And I wasn't talking, as a newbie, I didn't have a lot of people to call, long distance. I look back on that and I find it not amusing, but I can understand why some guys would be PO'd sometimes because they'd maybe been a star somewhere else and came in, but without doing what we talked at length about Bobby Shane doing, without preparing a path for themselves first to make sure that they were going to be used on top. Now, sometimes that didn't matter if they. I'll give you an example. A Hispanic wrestler that worked with Roy Shire for a long time, Pepper Gomez?
Yes.
Pepper Gomez, yeah, and I booked him for a while. He had to be in his, at least 50, and he still looked great. He kept his body great, but he had stiffened up after taking bumps for 30-some, 40 years, whatever, and his face looked older. You know, he didn't do plastic surgery or anything, so it was hard to push him, and plus he'd been there forever. So it was hard to push him on top. I tried a couple of times out there in San Francisco. I tried booking him in like co-main events or whatever. The response was not overwhelming. It was okay. I mean, but he wouldn't draw that many more Hispanic wrestlers or fans than he had when he was underneath the card. They brought him to Florida when I was working down there. I wasn't booking. They brought him in there, and within the first week or so, I think they put the Southern heavyweight title on him. That wasn't a big one, but it was supposedly more important than, you know, like the Florida title, because it was the whole Southern part of it. Because it had not been competed over, it hadn't been the center of a lot of matches. Like the Florida heavyweight championship was up for grabs many more times than the Southern heavyweight champion belt was up for grabs, so it didn't mean as much. But anyway, they did put the belt on him right away, and they got him over. I mean, they were, you know, having him beat people, and there's a lot of Hispanics in Florida, especially South Florida. We talked about that with not just Jose Lothario in Puerto Rico, but
yeah.
And Tyree Pride was not Hispanic, but part of his patois might have reached out. I'm not sure that the combination of languages that made up that patois, Portuguese and Spanish, I think he reached out to Hispanic listeners too. But even with the Southern heavyweight belt, Pepper didn't draw. They had to give up on him within, I don't know, a month or so.
About 3 months, I think it was.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Something like that.
I mean, it wasn't an abject failure. He just never, and you could tell also from the matches, he has slowed down, and you could see it. And, you know, when you can't move, like me, for example, now, when you can't move very fast, at least not for very long, people can see it. And you can't convince people that, you know, what they're seeing. And, well, yes, you can, but if a guy can't get from one side of the ring to the other in a timely manner, that's pretty obvious. It doesn't take long to figure that out. And don't get me wrong, I was sorry that he didn't draw because, you know, it hurt everybody's paycheck. There was no guarantee, let's put it that way,
right,
of what was going to draw and what wasn't.
Well, that's more insight into being a booker, you know, and some of the faults that come with it, or maybe not necessarily faults, but you get blamed upon. Hey, I should be getting pushed here. I'm a draw, whether they're proven or not. There's guys I'm sure that didn't draw anywhere that were thinking the same thing. If somebody would just give me a shot over this Barry Windham fellow, sure, that's the ticket. There's so many guys better than Barry Windham, right? Yeah. Well, last we left off, we talked about a ton of talent, but at the end of the show, you kind of surprised me. I always make a list of guys that are in the territory at the same time as you. And I'll hit on the guys I see you that you worked a lot with or teamed a lot with and other famous names that you might recall stories with. But in this particular era, this is when you're trying to build up the territory, lots of newcomers. And you were talking about all the old stars like a Pepper Gomez. And here we got the Sean Royals, the Chris Champions, which we'll touch on in a minute. But there was a name at the bottom of the list. I said, Bob probably won't remember this guy. And this is why I put everybody on the list, though, Bob, because sometimes you shock me. And you would mention a guy by the name of the Falcon, who was Steve Brinson. And he did some jobs, I believe, even for the Cowboy prior to this. So Brinson comes in, and you told a little bit about the story last time out, and it kind of surprised me. I had never heard anything about Steve Brinson or his past and what you were able to facilitate here for him to have some work as the Falcon in the Florida territory in 1986. I was hoping if you could expound upon that this week.
Sure. Well, I met Steve, and I liked him. He'd been a football player at Auburn, so he had a college background. I don't know, maybe he played one semester his freshman year and flunked out of school. He played freshman football, and so he could say, "Yeah, I played football at Auburn." Maybe he never got in a game. I stayed at his house a few times in later years. I never saw any films of him doing anything, really tremendous. But the idea that he had been an athlete in college, that was a link between us. I always respected that someone like what we talked about with Wahoo McDaniel, having been a great football player and then and Ernie Ladd, both able to convert from football to wrestling and be excellent and, reach to the top in both. You got to respect something like that. But as a booker, and even as a person, knowing that people had gone to college, and it's not a snob thing. All it means is I know that especially if they got a degree, that they had to have the discipline of being able to study, work for 4 years to get that I could count on them to have some kind of discipline, that I didn't have to worry about them running off in the middle of the night or whatever. Or I wasn't going to be called, every other day to come get them out of jail. So that had some bearing. And the other thing, it's not quite as laudatory. It's not like a positive thing. But Steve was a chemist of sorts. And, we've used a euphemism for all sorts of, for everything from steroids to, we've never talked about heroin, but certainly cocaine to steroids and everything in between, uppers, downers, pot, hash, all the different things. And we talked during Olie's reign about Olie himself saying, I got a whole crew, they're all drug addicts. Well, it basically was the truth. Generally, everybody was doing something. Now, maybe not everybody. For example, I don't see a Bill Eadie. He really had his goals and his drive and his ambitions together. And I think he had a family at home even while he was working. I never saw him out at a club or ever do any drugs. So, it's not like everybody, but the majority of people were doing something. And Steve, when I met him, first of all, he was a likable guy. He was an athlete. He looked like one. He was big. He was about 6'3", weighed about 230 or whatever, and nice. He had very little blubber on him. He was mostly muscle, and he was a decent worker. And he was like a good old country boy. He was, he had the southern accent. He's from Georgia, and he was likable. But also, he was my pharmacist. Let's put it that way.
Wow.
And and so in order to do that, I would travel with him, just me and him, so that whatever we might be doing, like sharing, a popsicle or something, whatever it might be, it was in private, because in those days in Florida, if you got caught even with pot, you were fired by Eddie Graham or whoever was running things. Mm-hmm. So if Eddie knew about it, he got rid of you. So we had to seriously kayfabe, and that creates kind of a bond in a way too. He got caught doing some kind of a pharmaceutical deal that was illegal. He was a minor player in sort of an organization that was marketing things, and they caught him, and they tried to get him to name the bigwigs, okay, we caught you with, say, have a pound, this is hypothetical, say you caught him with a pound of pot, mm-hmm. or 5 pounds, say. And they say, well, okay, where'd you get it? Who'd you get it from? Did you grow it yourself? Where did you get it from? Well, he wouldn't tell. He didn't, they used to call it narc out. He wouldn't talk about who he was working with. I don't know. It might have been deadly dangerous to do that, for all I know. But in all the movies and the TV things you see about the narcotics business, anybody who's got loose lips usually doesn't last too long. They get blown away. And I don't mean getting high. They get dead. In fact, I didn't even know that he was in prison. But I got a letter or a call from him that he was in a prison. It wasn't Rayford or any hard. It was up in Georgia. I can't think of the name of the place, or in that area. And he just told me that they had a deal that if he could get work, he could get out early. So I found out the particulars of how to make that work. I wrote a letter, said that I would hire him, and in fact, he had to stay when he first got out. He had to stay at a halfway house in Tampa, but within a week or two. Since he kept getting in so late, like coming back from Miami, he wouldn't get that back in like till 2:00 or whatever. After a week or so, they let him stay with me for a while and live with me for a while. And then he, after he, spent a couple 3 months with no infractions of any kind, he was kind of off the radar. We became friends, and I used to go stay with him, and he was fun to be around. And I'd stay at his house for, I don't know, a few days at a time. And he started a business once he got out of wrestling. He started a business, I think it was cleaning buildings, like brick buildings or aluminum siding. Mm-hmm. He had a high pressure. He had a couple crews he would send out, and he had a pretty good business going for him. So he was one of the few guys that did take what money he had and do something with it. The main reason that he came up in the story was we were talking about Ron Bass and my problem with Gordon Solie, where Gordon wanted Luger out of there. Lex Luger, because Luger wouldn't genuflect and, like he was a pope or asked to kiss his ring or something before he did an interview. In fact, he just treated Gordon like he was some other schlub of some kind. Well, Luger didn't know. I mean, all he knew was he had this great big body, and that's what everybody talked about. I mean, people looked at him and nobody was going, oh, what a skinny little geek he is. Everybody's going, oh my God, because he looked great, but he thought he was great too. And in the business, the show business, he was indeed a very positive show for a business that has to do with muscles and sports and all that. So anyway, Gordon Solie and I got sideways because I think Gordon wanted the belt off Luger so he wouldn't have to interview him as much. Or maybe he could just say something like, well, you lost the belt, didn't you? Or something like that. I don't know. When Ron Bass, when he showed me that his heart wasn't really in the right place or his professional responsibilities. I'm not trying to knock him personally. I think he was, I've never heard anybody say anything about him being any kind of like a child molester, a punk of any kind. And he was a decent person. He could be, the wrestling business was, could be treacherous. We talked about stooges and guys looking for ways to better themselves. If they couldn't better themselves by their own work and ability, by belittling someone above them, they might be able to move up if they could detract from someone that was higher on the card than them. But with Ron, I just found out that one time when, in fact, it was with the Falcon. They had a match at the Cherry Festival in Tampa once a year. It's almost like it's not a big deal. It's like there's all kinds of attraction. I think there might have been an auto race on before us or after the wrestling. It was just one of the things going on. So it was no big deal. But the fact that he went out there and had a match, it went from like being a 95% really good match to a 10% a good match, because he left out that last 5%, which was the comeback of the babyface. And that's what most of the fans are waiting for. So if you don't give it to them, it's like people feel like they got cheated. So, but what I found out, this might have just been me. Might have been a problem it might have been my fault. Maybe Ron didn't trust me, but when he showed me I couldn't trust him, and Don, my attitude towards him never changed. I was never nasty or anything. He never let me get too close to him. But anyway, with the Falcon, when Ron Bass went into the finish, he had Ron Bass in a small package. He didn't know enough to break the hold himself and pull him up and start a comeback. He was too green. So, a veteran, if it had been me, I would have, and Ron says, okay, small package finish. I either would have said no or I would have done something else first, or if he set it up and it was clear he wasn't going to kick out, I would have done something. Pulled him up, for that old heel thing, pull him up.
Sure.
No, refused to pin him. But Falcon didn't know any better, or Steve Brinson. But Steve and I had a relationship for, I don't know, maybe 10 years, even after I quit wrestling. I used to, when I was down that area, I'd go see him, stay with him. He was kind of fun to be around. And so, and I was happy to help him get out of prison. I got, in another episode, I talked about getting the shortest scholarship offer from a coach that I didn't even know his name yet. And the third sentence he said to me was, first one was, where'd you go to college? And I said, well, I haven't gone to school yet. Actually, his second sentence to me was, you want a scholarship? And I didn't even know what college he was talking about. It could have been Mother Teresa's, school for semi-virgins of some kind. And as long as it was getting me out of the Army, I just said, yeah, I always liked that Mother Teresa. Yeah, I'll go there. Anyway, I haven't seen him for a while. We've been out, we lost touch, but, I still think of him with regard. He was a decent guy, and he made something out of himself. I mean, he was an ex-convict who got his own business started in his hometown, where he lived. So you got to hand that to a guy, who was able to do that. I mean, it takes work. I remember staying with him. He'd be gone half the time, half the day. He'd come home for lunch, and I might go out with him in the afternoon while he'd go out and be supervising he'd had a couple crews and go out and be checking, making sure everything was going okay. But, we'd have time to party a little bit. And he was fun to be around. So, I was glad to be able to, again, I'll give him a hand out. Prison, the Army feels like prison, but you got a lot of outs. I mean, you got a lot more freedoms.
Sure.
Like going on leave for a month, for example, than you do when you're in a prison. Yeah, I think his wrestling career was fairly short.
Right.
The Falcon, but he was decent. I don't recall where he learned to work, but he knew how to work a little bit. Yeah, that's one that we're talking about.
Yeah, he jumped around. I think he broke in. The earliest I could find on him was 1984, so he's only a couple years in the business, and he typically worked as enhancement. So for him to get a little bit of a push here, if you will, in the Falcon character, that was fun. But unfortunately, he's going to be unmasked by Kevin Sullivan, I think in January of '87. And he's not too long for the business after that. So this is like his only real good run, if you want to call it that, in the business. So it was nice you were able to give him a little work, and he was able to do something with it, before going into business for himself, if you will, outside of the wrestling world. So
yeah, it was. To me, it's a success story.
Yeah,
a lot of the guys didn't take advantage of what money they did make. I'm one of them.
There's a lot of them.
But Well, there's another factor involved too. Both my boys have gone to college. I mean, some of the money I've spent. Kyle graduated with honors. Ryan's still got a semester to go, and I'm hoping he'll finish before too long. But he's been working, building his stature in a job for 10 years now, and doing very well at it. So, I haven't ever said, "Hey, you need to quit doing that and go back to school." But I'm hoping. I mean, I went back to college at age 63. I already had a degree, but I went back to become a special education teacher. So you can go back to school, anytime you want. I saw an ad on TV the other day. It was about getting a college or a high school degree, about some guy who had to drop out, and he was 43 when he ended up getting his GED. But his elderly father was there to hug him, and his sister and all that. And you might not know it. It's hard to believe. There's, education in this country. I'm not knocking America. This is the greatest country in the world, I think. In many ways, in other ways, we're not. But in many ways, we are. We still do have comparative freedom in this country. I read the other day that in 2023, 46% of the people in this country didn't read a book. Didn't read one book. And I've been a reader my whole life, and I'm not knocking people, but when I say that, but you can learn streetwise. You can learn how to live on, by what happens to you in life. But as far as education, a lot of it you have to pick up secondhand through either books or videos or some way of learning other than having to do it yourself. Otherwise, you got to experience all this stuff yourself. Imagine trying to take a car engine apart with absolutely no information at all about how to do it, as opposed to having a book showing you all the steps. Good. If you're a wrestling fan out there, I don't care whether you read or not. As long as you're listening to this program, you're okay with me.
Yeah. Well said, well said. No, so we were talking before we went on the air here, just some of the names we were going to touch on this week, and you brought up Bubba Douglas, who was not on my list because I didn't know if Bubba was really, I guess I didn't do the digging to realize that Bubba was still here in the Florida territory, but I did know he passed away. And you said you were there when it happened in the building, I guess. Bubba Douglas passes away, I believe, February of 1986 here in Florida. And it was on a show you were a part of, no?
Right. It was a show in Lakeland. And I'd gotten to know Bubba a little bit. I liked him. He's a good guy. He did something one time. It might have been a freak because he only did it one time. We were playing softball, just me and him. We were taking turns pitching to each other. And he hit a softball at least 400 feet. Hit it completely out of the playing field over the building next to it, wow, which was four stories high. It had to be one of those deals. He was a big, strong guy, but it had to be one of those deals where he made perfect contact. I mean, everything dynamic physically.
Right.
All the physical characteristics had to be just right. I couldn't believe it. The ball just took off and just kept going and going and going. And I had hit some long flies. In fact, one of the ones I remember, this will be a little aside, in Knoxville, Ron Fuller, for some reason, not some reason, he charged money. He used to have softball games between the heels and the baby faces. And, and it draw up at the Knoxville had a baseball stadium, not a big one. It was like AAA or something like that. And he would have, we had a couple of them there. And I look back on it now, and I think to me, it's like it's an expose. Say you got a guy standing at the plate with a baseball bat in his hand, and the catcher on the other team, say the catcher is the heel, and the guy with the bat's a babyface, and then the night before, that heel crippled the guy's mother, who's got the bat.
Sure.
And now that's what they did in the arena. And now he's going to stand there with a baseball bat in his hand and just ignore the guy who could. I never did get that. But the reason I understand Fuller did it was because he charged admission and people would pay to come.
Right.
But I remember the special pleasure of Ron Fuller playing center field and hitting the ball over his head for a home run. And I remember that, Ron, if you're listening. Remember that? I remember watching your big, tall, gangly butt trying to run to catch up with that fly ball I hit over your head. Next time I was up, he was playing about 50 yards deeper. I remember that one with pleasure. For some of the people, those of you who might have missed some of our earlier programs, Ron Fuller happens to be one of the guys who knocked me on the air for I don't know how many times, but for many, many years. So I can look back at pleasure and say, you know what? He never hit one over my head. But it was different having that game. I thought later on, I thought, man, how could you do that? To me, it was like a blatant expose.
Sure, I was wondering that too when I was thinking about, the baby faces and how heated was a certain storyline, and I'm assuming he trotted everybody out there because it wasn't like the WWF later on where they would have 40 guys on the roster, right? So you had a nice small roster, but had probably pretty much everybody played. So the heat between some of the storylines that were ongoing, and especially down there in the South, I'm sure that had to be a head scratcher for some of the fans out there, but I'm sure they had a good time anyway. But very, very peculiar way to do things. But again, if it's going to make you money, I mean, that's why you're a promoter at the end of the day. But you talked about hitting the fly ball over Ron's head, and you talked about Bubba Douglas is where we started with this story. He hits a 400 footer up here. No, you're fine. But unfortunately, sad days come here in '86 for Bubba when he passes away. Very, very freak deal based on his age. I think he was about 42 years old when he passes away here.
Well, Bubba was overweight, and I've been overweight most of my life, so I can empathize. But in Lakeland, I think that I think you could get free hot dogs, or maybe they were very nice, and they would bring, they didn't do it to the heels, but I think the baby faces, and maybe the fans did it, they used to send in maybe a dozen or half a dozen hot dogs into the dressing room. And Bubba apparently came back after every match, in between matches, and ate a hot dog. And after he ate 3 or 4 of them, he had to go out there during one of the matches. He had to run around and do a lot of, and he was, it just overburdened his heart. His heart was working real hard, trying to digest the food he had in his stomach. So when he got it pumping too hard, I don't know, maybe he had heart problems before, but we heard everything stopped, and we heard that he had passed out, was unconscious in the dressing room, and then it was in the babyface dressing room. It wasn't anywhere I could see it. And that later, I'm not sure if he died right there or if it was later at the hospital, but we lost him. And like you say, 42 years old, that's awful young. Age is a funny thing, it all depends on your perspective. When you're 80, you look at 60 as being young. Some people, when they're 40, they look at 60 as being old. Oh my God! My parents are 60. My parents are 60 years old. My God, they're old. It's all perspective. Someone like Andre, who kind of knew from his family history with his grandfather and his father, both passing away at the age of 46. He had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen to him, and he lived his life that way. Yeah, and he said that was sort of predestined. Their particular program, I'm not sure exactly what it's called, agromally, something like that, but giantism has that effect on you. Usually, there's not too many giants that live a long, happy life, let's put it that way.
Well, luckily, in more recent years, they've finally found a cure, to go in there to the pituitary gland and put an end to it. And I believe Big Show, Paul White, who was the Giant also in WCW, he actually went and had that surgery done many years ago now, so it certainly gave him a much longer life.
Oh, that's great. I'm really glad to hear that. Back in at like 1900, before they had developed vaccines for diseases, child mortality was 2 out of 5. 2 out of every 5 children born would die in childhood from things like even croup, measles, and whooping cough. There were 2 doctors who invented cures for polio. Both of them, I think, got the Nobel Prize. If they didn't, they should have. But yeah, my grandfather was a veterinarian and a doctor. He lost one of his children. He lost a daughter to a childhood disease, and he was a doctor. He lost a daughter to something like measles or something like that they didn't have a cure for yet. So, right. Well, let's put it this way. In 1900, the life expectancy for man was 52. Now it's, 82? Well, because of, and a lot of that is because of medical advances in nutrition and lifestyle, just basic things that, that people found out how to eat, hygiene, for example. A lot of people belabor modern times and saying, the good old days used to be a lot better. If I was losing, if I had 5 kids and I was losing 2 of them, I'd say, well, I'd like to go back to the good old days. No, I wouldn't. Not with the way now that, just recently I had cataract surgery. I could see much better. I think I told you and our listeners that I had the good news of finding out that I don't have COPD, which that's a wonderful news, because you're talking about your lungs are rather important.
A little bit.
And I thought, I've got a new one since we talked. My last malady, I got a swallowing problem in my throat. Every once in a while, when I swallow, but something doesn't go down. Something I swallowed doesn't go down. It sits somewhere in the back of my throat, and it just bugs me to the point where I have to cough, 3 or 4 coughs. It takes a while for it to go away. Well, I want to find out that for sure that there's nothing that's going to get worse, for example. So I saw a throat specialist last week, but the doctor said, well, everything looks okay. So I've got a swallow test coming up. Anybody out there who's hoping that is maybe considering me a babyface now and saying, well, good, Bob. And those of you who still think of me as a heel, nah. I'm not done yet.
Well, that's always good news.
And I've also found out it's fairly common among the elderly. And that's what I am. I'm 83. As many of you have maybe been able to decipher from listening to me, I might not have an 83-year-old mind. I might have like a 13-year-old mind, the way I think sometimes.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. But that's not all. You can also check out the Pro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puroresu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron over at Patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, Patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series covering many past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
We'll jump back into things here. Now, we were talking about some of the names that were here in the territory back in this time frame, 1986. A lot of guys who would maybe be referred to at this point in the time in their career as up-and-comers. And two of those guys were Sean Royal and Chris Champion. They worked these cards, and they would eventually be teamed together and work for Jim Crockett Promotions, at the time booked by Dusty Rhodes as the New Breed, hailing from the year 2002. And Bob said, well, I wanted to go back and look and see what these guys were doing. And so you did a little Googling on Mr. Royal and Mr. Champion, and you come across the fact that they had been managed by a robot, at least for a brief time. I believe the name was XTC1 was the name of the robot, but they traveled back supposedly from the year 2002. And I asked you, Bob, off air, do you want to guess who the president of the United States was in 2002 in the Crockett world of 1986, 7, whatever that was? And you guessed what was it? Donald Trump, kind of jokingly. I said, no, it was close, though, because it was the booker. It was the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Of course, he would book himself to be president in 2002. So Dusty booking ahead,
Wow.
looking ahead. And what was really funny was New Breed were heels, and Dusty was a baby face, and he still had them come back in time, and I use air quotes there, and state that the Dream was the president.
I like it. Well, I think those guys did well, but I was reviewing and thinking about the names that we collaborated on, talking about Sean. These two guys, Sean and Chris Champion, were two of them. And I did some research looking up. When I had them, they were new and they were underneath. They were fairly green. Right. And every show during the year I booked there, every show was critical because there wasn't much operating capital. I've said on former programs that Matsuda and Duke Kiyomuka had both mortgaged their homes to keep the company afloat. They had gotten to a point where they weren't able to pay, I don't know, maybe the rent on the building. I don't know if they owned that building or if they were renting it or whatever their expenses were. or to pay, maybe just to pay the wrestlers, but they had to mortgage their homes. And, for a while there, after I let Kevin and Mark go, and Blackjack quit. Now that's a big loss, but I still had Barry, and I had Jesse Barr, who, while not being someone who's like, Bruiser Brody type guy, Jesse was a good hand, and if you did the right things with him, you could get, you could make him you could make him a heel that had some heat. And I had Barry Windham, which was probably one of the top 5 guys in the business at that time.
Sure.
In terms of looks and skill, he had it all. And Kendall Windham, in opposition to what Buddy Colt or anybody else was saying about him, that being tall and skinny, that worked for him. And now if he'd have been a heel, it would have been different. But as a babyface, that worked for him because he looked like, he was going to get creamed. But he was a legitimate 6'4", 6'3", 6'4", and he really could fight. I mean, he was a tough kid. Some of the wrestlers, amateur wrestlers that you would win world championships or national championships in this country weren't great big muscular guys. Some of them were very slender, who had that tendon strength rather than great big muscles. They had tendon strength. They had muscle strength too, of course, but they weren't Schwarzenegger types. They were lean and mean, who were national champions and gold medal winners in the Olympics, without being excessively muscular. So you didn't have to have muscles to be tough. And Kendall, I've told the story before, I'll tell it again. He used to get picked on, and people would make the mistake in bars where they'd say something to him about being too skinny and say anything about him that knocked him. And now this is a baby face, by the way. He's not a heel. But anybody would say, and maybe for that reason, maybe if he had been a heel, people would have been more reluctant to mess with him. But people would maybe start talking about him. He had 2 or 3 warrants waiting for him with his paycheck every week. And he always sent Barry, his brother Barry, in to get his check because he didn't want to come in there. He thought maybe there might be a cop in there waiting for him. So he seldom showed up around the office. He didn't want to even hear Charlie May say, "Hey, I got 6 warrants for your arrest in here." He didn't even want to hear that. So he really was tough, but he was a good talent, as opposed to people saying, looking at him and saying, "Oh, he looks too skinny." But what does he look like in action? What does he look like in action? When he hits somebody like me, for example, and he winds up with a punch, and I'm wide open for it, and I take a big bump, well, people believe that. I mean, Kendall Windham does look like Arnold Schwarzenegger compared to George Goulas. I met George, and he seemed like a nice fellow, but he's he's a big, tall guy. But Kendall at least was lean and mean. He had a lot of muscle on. What he did have was, he probably weighed about 210, and it was all muscle. He at least looked like an athlete, a skinny one, yes, but he looked like an athlete. Well, George Goulas was on top, and he didn't look like he looked like he might play chess. He didn't look like checkers or something. He didn't look like an athlete. And yet he got over, he drew money all those years because they would have people like Big Bad John go out there, and George would hit him with a right cross, and John would go down and take a big bump, or maybe that'd be the finish.
Yeah, I don't know how much money George Goulas drew, but he certainly, kept his spot there because Daddy told the other guys to sell. The story goes, Daddy said sell for me, and that's what they did. And so George, but it was wise, they keep him with Tojo or somebody that was over as well in the territory. So he wasn't too far away from tag team matches with George Goulas. I think Nick kind of knew what he had there in his son. But so you talked about Kendall Windham, obviously pretty affectionately is in regards to his work rate. And you work him quite a bit here near the end of your run as a wrestler. I see you work Kendall off and on, both of the Windhams. There's tag matches with you and Luger right before Luger turns babyface against Windham, Barry and Kendall, or Windham and Rotunda. And loser leave town matches. Here's one in West Palm Beach. Bob Roop losing to Kendall Windham May 19th. So that was right about the end of your run as a pro wrestler, because your name basically disappears off the cards at the end of May. So you're working Kendall quite a bit here. And Sarasota, another loser leave town. So you're kind of working your way out of the business here with Kendall. So Kendall's the guy that kind of retired Bob Roop. So he's got that going for him anyway.
Well, I'm sure many people are very grateful. All of a sudden, Kendall's established a new norm for likability. Oh,
now he's over.
Bob Roop. I love the guy now.
Yeah, now he's getting over.
Well, what was going on was I had gotten to a point where I was burned out as far as working and booking.
Yeah.
And I had just lost my desire to be in the ring. And the booking job was taken. I mean, it was a mistake. But you can look, hindsight's always 20/20. Dusty did it right. Every territory he was in, he got himself over like $1 million. When he was booker, he got himself over like he was the top guy in the territory. That way, if he lost his booking job, he could stay there.
Right. They couldn't do without him.
Right. He could stay there as a talent. And I never did that. I always would push. I wouldn't put myself down in preliminary matches, but I didn't make myself the star.
Right.
I was trying to build everybody. And maybe in hindsight it was a mistake, but I don't look back with regrets, because I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today if I'd done anything different. And quite frankly, I'm happy to be sitting here talking to you today, and knowing that our listeners out there, maybe having the miles go by where they're driving somewhere, listen to us expound on different things. Most of the things that you had no intention at all of me talking about, I just throw in there anyway, because you know me, I can't keep my brain on one track for very long. But anyway, will you have the information of how much longer I was still booker after I quit working in the ring?
I had that last episode when we were talking. I feel like it was somewhere into the fall of '86 here. So maybe October. I could be off, but it feels like it was somewhere around that point in time, because you can kind of see a shift in the book of a lot of things at that point. And then Mike Graham's got to return to the ring, so that's kind of a tell as well. Not that he wasn't used at all prior to that, but he was used sporadically up until that point. And so Mike's back, Kevin's back, things of that nature by the end of the year. So you can kind of tell you're no longer, at the helm with the booking, but it's fun while it lasts. And we just mentioned Chris Champion and Sean Royal, and both guys were trained in Florida. Chris Champion, I think, was trained by the Malenkos, and Sean Royal was trained by Hiro Matsuda. So these guys had some proper background and training, and they weren't in the business very long, honestly, by 1986, maybe a couple years at the most for both of them. And within a matter of months, from here, they're going to be called up as a tag team to work for Jim Crockett. So both guys had potential. Unfortunately, there was a car accident, a very severe car accident, and I can't remember which was. I think it was Champion, but I could be wrong. One of them was out for a substantial period of time. Both guys would continue to try to make ends meet later on in the business, but neither of them really with much success after that. But it's really unfortunate something like that happens. There's been so many car accidents. We've even seen some take some lives over time. But yeah, serious accidents like that. I know Eddie Gilbert was in one like that when he was working in New York. That put him out for a little while there as well. So there's just, you never know what's going to happen out there on the roads. And that's pretty much the story of the new breed. Just getting going, unfortunately, and it was taken away from them. They tried to rebuild it later on, but it just really never get over like it did the original time. But at least it happened, right? It's on film. People can go back and have a little laugh at the gimmick and the robot and Dusty Rhodes as president, and then watch the guys in the ring, and they were really ahead of their time in some of the things they were trying to do in the ring.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But you talked about Florida guys. We talked about Florida promotions, and another guy sticks out to me because he's around every Florida convention, it seems, and That's David Sierra. He wrestled as Fidel Sierra, the Cuban Assassin, the White Saint. Yeah, many a jack of all trades when it comes to gimmicks. He worked a ton of different mask gimmicks out in Portland as well. He was on top in Portland under many a hoods. Top Gun as a baby face and as a heel as well under a couple of gimmicks. So do you remember David Sierra coming through here during this period? Looks like he was here while you were booking.
Yeah, he was working as the Cuban Assassin because I know he didn't have a mask on. And he was a good worker. He wasn't unathletic looking, but he wasn't in any, I mean, if you stand next to Luger, he wouldn't even look like an athlete compared to Luger, you know. But, you know, he was a good talent. And believe me, there were a lot of people stand next to Luger and not look like athletes, me included. But anyway, he was a good hand. I never had any trouble with him. I do remember him being upset with me when I didn't book him. I couldn't book him every night. I mean, he didn't say anything untoward or anything, but he was unhappy about that, and I don't blame him. You know, that's how you make your living, is getting booked. But there was a lot going on down there. I got into it a little bit earlier about having dissatisfaction among people who were supposed to be like part of the support group of the promotion. Gordon Solie, for one, of course, almost the face of Championship Wrestling Florida, or Florida Championship Wrestling. Mm-hmm. And Buddy Colt, who also was a color commentator, I believe, on the Sunday show, and Mike Graham, who, you know, had been seen since he probably first got in the ring when he was 17 or 18. Now he's 35, and he's been seen all those years, at least partially part of the time. He didn't want to work full time, but he did like working on Saturday night or whatever, so he could get out and run wild a little bit on the road. But yeah, you had these factions, I should say, that were anti-Bob. It wasn't. I'm not being paranoid and saying, "Oh, everybody was out to get me," but I talked in length about why Gordon was unhappy with me because of Luger. I didn't do what he wanted me to do with Luger, or he suggested I do. He couldn't tell me what to do, but I had agreed to do it. But I had to change. I changed my mind when I changed my mind. Gordon didn't come to even talk to me about it. He just got pissed off and quit talking to me. And then we talked about this. Buddy Colt, rest in peace. Gordon, rest in peace, Buddy. But Buddy had the idea that Kendall Windham was too skinny to be a wrestler. And yet I had a very good opposition that told me differently, and that was wrestling fans. Because when I not just my matches with him, anybody who worked with him, he didn't ever have people going, that's fake, I don't believe that, kid couldn't beat anybody. I never heard one person say that. He was over. And so we had Gordon and Buddy and Mike Graham. So I had those three guys and Mike, of course, I wouldn't book him. If I booked him, I had to leave somebody off. And the guys that were working every day, Mike already had $1 million or so in the bank, maybe more than that. And so he didn't need the money. The guys that were working, especially the underneath guys, needed paydays. So I wasn't booking those three. So I had three unhappy people there. And then it started with Jesse Barr, I think. You can correct me on the dates. But I got a call. I've said this, I've told this before, but we finally I got Jesse to the point where he got some decent heat as a heel. And he called me one morning. He said, "Bob, I got a call from Vince McMahon or WWE or whatever." Right. And I said, "Well, okay, what's the deal?" He said, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you that I've got to go today. I got to leave today." I said, "What?" I wished him luck. And then not too much longer, Barry, and that was a real killer when Dusty took Barry.
Yeah.
That was just a killer. And then I'm not sure whether Barry came first I'm sure his very first, and then Luger.
Yes.
And then I lost Luger. So there I got three, one of my main heels, two of my main baby faces are gone. You know, they're not there anymore. And times got tough. The houses started dropping down. Matsuda and Kiyomuka, who we'd had a few months earlier, they had a little party where they burned their second mortgages that they paid off.
Okay.
They burned them and put them in an wastebasket. And we had a little sip of wine to celebrate. All of a sudden, they were worrying about having to go back to the bank and take out another second mortgage or whatever, or do it again. Another factor that happened, and I don't know why, and I bless Danny Miller, I love it. He was our the man who got the town for us to run. And all of a sudden, we were having weeks where we weren't booked. We weren't booked every night. We didn't have a show every night. And I never did find out why. It wasn't my job to go to Danny and ask him, because he did, I didn't pay him.
Okay.
Hiro paid him.
Right.
So with that happening, times got really, really tight. And with when it gets tight and you're not drawing, there's all kinds of cabals and things going on. People saying, "Oh yeah, we need to get somebody else," or could we do better, or whatever. And I'm talking about in a period of like 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. We went from like doing real well, having real good weeks, good shows every night, good houses every night. Our business fell, at least by 2/3, or by half. And so obviously that put a lot of pressure on Matsuda. And then I screwed up. Back in the day, I talked about this before when Gordon Solie and I were he would come up. I didn't invite him, but he would come up after getting back from working over in Tennessee or wherever it was. He'd come back, and he'd come up to the office. He'd get off the plane instead of going home. He'd come by the office and sit up there on the couch in my office. And we'd talk, we'd exchange ideas. The guy, I was probably the 50th booker he'd worked with, so he had all this great information. He had good ideas. So, and I didn't particularly, I don't want to say dislike him. I didn't particularly like him either, but I respected him because, he'd made a great career for himself, mm-hmm. and he had good ideas. So anyway, but the thing is, he was an alcoholic, and I'm not saying this. His daughter is in her book, The Solie Chronicle, delineates that. I'm not saying that, Gordon, but she did. And so the pressure I was feeling, I talked earlier about with the Falcon and using certain medicines. I also was drinking, and I didn't have a fifth. I had a half-gallon of rum in a drawer on my desk. Well, what I was doing was occasionally, Tuesday was a very busy day, but I was making TV for Wednesday, and sometimes if the show that night was simple, a fairly simple show, I would ask Bill Fonzie, the referee, I would call him and give him the finishes for the first 2 or 3 matches, so I didn't have to go down there till later, because I had stuff to do, maybe still working on the TV for whatever reason, and they were, we might have already done the same thing in the week before somewhere else, so it wasn't like a big deal. But one time I did it, and I was going to let him do it, and I forgot Ric Flair was in the territory. So I had to go to the show early. I couldn't wait until near the last matches. And I'd been drinking, and you could tell. I wasn't staggering or anything, but you could tell.
Sure.
And Matsuda never came to the match, or very seldom came to the matches. But because Flair was there, he happened to be there that night, and he saw me in that condition, and that was maybe the beginning of the end. But that being said, the fact that I was needing to use chemicals and drinking, that's the worst thing I could have been doing for my own health. You're talking about a guy who was an Olympian, who's treating himself like that. And that was all due to the stress and the pressure. That's not my forte of living under stress. Some people love it. Some guys like to work on skyscrapers where they're a mile off the ground, walking across a bar with, a steel beam with nothing to catch them, no net, nothing. Yeah. Just tiptoeing or, tap dancing across like they're having fun. Yeah, I could be on the third floor. I'd be throwing up. But, I didn't handle stress. I couldn't handle it without help, let's put it this way. So I'll put it to you this way. After I was let go, within 2 weeks, I wasn't drinking anymore. I wasn't using drugs anymore. Oh, so because the stress was gone.
Right.
And so it was the best thing that happened, really.
Well, you talked about those guys, though. The names you mentioned, Gordon Solie, and I know what kind of started that too. You talked about you were listening to ideas with him, and then he kind of felt like he became co-booker with you by you maybe using a couple of the ideas and having all those hours of conversations with Gordon. And then when you don't take one of his pieces of advice in regards to de-pushing, if you will, Lex Luger, which is just crazy. But of course, Gordon, is looking at it from a personal point of view and not a business point of view, it sounds like, anyway.
Right.
And so he gets upset. But Gordon, Buddy Colt, and Mike Graham all have one thing in common. They had been in Florida since the beginning of time with Eddie Graham.
Yes.
Of course, Mike, the son of Eddie, so he's Florida through and through. Gordon was the very first and only announcer from the inception of TV, from my understanding anyway. When Eddie Graham got TV. And Buddy Colt was a top star there, at least, up until the plane crash and things of that nature. So, and Buddy stuck around forever. He was an announcer, like you said, here even into the 80s. So all these guys have been here forever.
Right.
And they had seen you, from the time you started, basically, every one of them in some way, shape, or form. So I can kind of see why these guys are like, well, how dare he, and things like that, because it's personal to them. Again, you go back to business can be personal, unfortunately, at times for the people that it's hurting anyway. And so that's unfortunate. But another part of your job, you talk about being stressful and having to deal with those kind of little cliques and things of that nature. But Jesse Barr is an excellent point. Not that he was the first guy Vince ever did that with, because there were bigger names, for Junkyard Dog, for instance, just one name, that really hurt territories that were on fire at the time, like for the Cowboy there. But Jesse Barr, and you guys, I kind of liken 1985, 86 Florida to what would eventually become Paul Heyman's ECW. You guys were too big to be small, too small to be big at this point. And so you're building these stars. You have Barry Windham. You're lucked out with Lex Luger. And you build Jesse Barr into a top heel talent. And I'm looking here on April 20th, Jesse Barr defeats Lex Luger. That's how big of a, the way he was being pushed. He defeats Luger in Orlando in a dog collar match. The very next night, April 21st, he's in Poughkeepsie at a WWF TV taping.
Yeah.
So that's how quick it happens overnight. And he goes over on the way out. He doesn't even get to do the job or give anybody, a little rub on the way out. So he was your top heel and you lose him. And I saw that later on in ECW, and you come to the realization of, oh, wow, because Paul Heyman had built these talents, and honestly, those talents had a lot of opportunity to get themselves over and create their own characters. But some of those guys would, build themselves up to the main event in ECW, and here comes Eric Bischoff with the WCW Ted Turner contract of much more money than they were making in Philadelphia. And so, they're going to jump ship, they're going to leave, and now Paul has to build his next guy up. And unfortunately, you're working with a lot of young talent that doesn't understand how to get themselves over, and they got to learn that at fast track, like you had to do with Lex Luger here. So I can see where there's a lot of stress coming at you from all different angles.
Yeah, definitely. And the office, when Eddie Graham was still alive, he always had. Now I wasn't there in the office during the years when he had gone back to the bottle and was drinking again. Mm-hmm. But before that, when he was there, you always had he wasn't at the office every day. I mean, he didn't need to be. He lived right on a canal. He had a nice boat. He could go out. I went out with him a number of times. You go out and go, just go for a boat ride, go fishing, water skiing, whatever. He had this great life at home. Although, in retrospect of how things ended up, it obviously wasn't that great or great enough. But the pressure that you start to feel, like you said, when a guy leaves, the reason for the 2-week notice that was customary in the business was that usually your cards are booked at least 1 week ahead, in some cases 2, so that they're already being advertised. And so if a guy just leaves, you're going to have, say, 2 or 3 guys leave. You're going to have, in those cards, when you go to the towns, you're going to have to substitute for them, which is the worst. It's not the very worst thing. A riot's the worst. But one of the worst things that you can do is false book cards, where you have to substitute, because you usually can't find somebody of the same stature. And the other thing was that if you say taken 3 years to build someone like a Johnny Valentine or whatever, and then he's going to leave, well, you got 2 weeks for him to go around and do jobs and have other people beat him. And all the stature that went into him is now passed on to other wrestlers who are going to stay there after he leaves. And that's the way the business works. Well, when guys just leave, like all the work we put into Jesse Barr, he took with him. There wasn't anything left of him for us to draw, to use to draw money with. And the same thing with Barry and Luger having to go, immediately. It almost crippled promotion, especially Barry. Barry was, like I say, a few times Kendall and Barry and I spent some time together, having a few beers and just chatting as kind of like people, not just about the business, but about our lives. I got to know them a little bit, and I feel privileged that they were nice enough to be open with me. But yeah, I've been in the ring with them and busted my butt to get them over, so they knew, my heart was in the right place. That I cared about the business, and I was professional with them in the ring. So there was mutual respect, and that was pleasant. That was nice. Very, very seldom can a booker break down and get close enough to the talent to talk to him on that level. But I knew those guys weren't going to give him any trouble. The next night I asked them both to do a job or get beat. They were going to say, well, Bob, I bought you a beer last night. You're going to beat me? I knew those guys were both pros. They weren't going to do that kind of crap. So it was safe to be with them. Very seldom would I have done that with anybody else. But, to lose those 3 guys like that made it very, very difficult. And when business gets bad, all the rumors that have been flying around for, say, Buddy Colt and Gordon Solie and Mike Graham, every Tuesday night they're in the hallway or somewhere, buzz about Bob Roop's this, he's a shit, he's this and that, he's a lousy booker and all that. If you go out there and there's a full house out there, or say even 3/4 full, and people are jumping up and down and enjoying the match, and the matches are getting over, well, all that blah, blah, blah about Bob Roop being crappy doesn't, there's contradiction there. Apparently he's not too crappy. He's still able to draw money. But when the houses really drop off, then all that talk, then it becomes serious. Right. Because it looks like they're right. It looks like they're correct. And frankly, they were, except for the fact that they started knocking me several months before the end. Mike, from the beginning, Mike Graham, because I wouldn't book him. And I told him why. Mike, I said, I got to leave somebody off. Oh, you can just add a match. He said, you just add a match. I said, well, I've been asked not to do that. Hiro Matsuda. And he never said, well, F Matsuda, but he kind of
interesting that Mike came directly to you instead of trying to go above your head if he was that in. And remember, Kiyomuka Matsuda had owned part of the Florida territory with his father, which is why they were the majority stockholders now. And it's just kind of weird that Mike is coming to you asking for work instead of going to the promoters themselves if he really, really wanted to get booked here. I don't know what his thought process was. It's kind of peculiar. I don't know. It just seems weird.
I don't know. I can see Hiro Matsuda. Hiro could be completely expressionless. You could look at him, he could not have an idea, not a clue what he's thinking. And he could be thinking he loves you. He could be thinking, I'm going to put an axe in your head. You can't tell. He wasn't going to have the talent. Also, it's a good Matsuda story. He wasn't going to let people come over my head because he didn't want to have to come and deal with me.
Yeah.
Not because he was afraid of me or anything, but he just didn't want the aggravation. He gave me the job. He trusted me to do it. The gate receipts were fine for a long time, so there was no need for him to, there was no need for him to interfere with.
I'm sure they were very happy they got to pay off those mortgages. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So I can see that. And also, you don't want to set the precedent either. If you're a Hiro Matsuda, okay, I overruled Bob Roop. Now Mike Graham goes and tells the other boys, and now everybody's going over your head, and Hiro doesn't want that. Yeah, absolutely. I totally get it.
Yeah. Well, but one of the good ones he did, John Heath was doing a Sunday show. I think it was John Heath and Buddy Colt, wasn't it?
Yes.
Do you remember?
Yeah. Yep. That's who it was.
John was like the lead, and Buddy was like the color commentator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something like that.
United States Wrestling or something like that. I can't remember what the show was called. Yeah.
And Matsuda comes, apparently, because of the TV ratings for that show were down for the Sunday show, Matsuda came to me and asked me to replace John Heath. And I mean, I couldn't believe it. He just walked in my office and said, I want you to get a replacement. They said, I got somebody from they got, I can't remember the name of the guy. He was some nice looking guy on local TV. But I mean, I didn't hire John Heath. I don't pay him. I'm not the one telling him what to do out there. Some of the script, some of the things that he, of course, he would be talking about matches that I booked, but I never talked to John before any of the Sunday shows.
Right.
I never had to talk with him or Buddy Colt about things. So Hiro asked me to fire him because he didn't want to do it himself. And I'm thinking, man, I wasn't going to refuse a request from my boss, who was paying me also. So I'm thinking, okay, what can I do? So I create this gimmick where John's out there, and Humperdink was working for us at the time, Oliver, Sir Oliver. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember who he was matching. But we did a thing where I had Humperdink call John's wife an old bag or something like that. He said, I saw, what I did is I had a week before, I had John's wife, in some way, a picture or something, or maybe I had her a little film clip of her or something on there. And Humperdink said something like, oh, yeah, I saw your wife. What an old bag you married. And I had John smack him, for saying that.
Right.
And then John went and retired quit his job because his job was to be an announcer. He wasn't supposed to be involved in the action, and he had gotten involved in the action, so he was resigning. And that's what I thought I could do that would leave him with some dignity. That it just because he got fired, it would at least leave him with some dignity. But he thought, and I'm not the kind of person. I'm not trying to brag here, but I'm not trying to person to go, oh, Matsuda wants me to fire you, so I'm sorry. I don't do that. I just feel it makes me look like a weakling, that.
So in John's eyes, then you fired him, basically.
Yes, his eyes. I'm the one that fired him, and I had my second match with him. I always liked him.
Right.
Always respected him. He was a nice guy, one of the nicest guys in the world. He barely ever spoke to me after that, and I don't blame him. I wasn't around that much for him to do it, but I'm sure he went to his grave, with negative thoughts about me, which is a shame. But that's part of the job. You know, when your boss tells you to do something, my response was, Matsuda would have been said, well, if you insist I do it, I'll give you my notice. Or I could say, well, no, I don't want to do it. And they'd say, well, yeah, that was one that was a little bit unusual. But you know, that was another factor. I started on it a little bit earlier, but when Eddie Graham was around, he had this great mind to draw from. If you ever had a problem, he could come in and he could explain it,
right,
and do it in 5 minutes, which would take someone else 45 minutes. He could fix the problem. And Matsuda and Duke didn't want to have anything to do with the booking, and I don't blame them. They were running, you know, had other things going, keep the company going, and I appreciated it really, because they didn't come in and try to tell me what to do. I remember when Harley was booking for Jim Barnett up in Atlanta, and later on when Harley and I were co-booking, he was the head booker. He let me run a couple towns, so I guess I could say co-booker.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him one time after I got to know him better. I told the story, but I said, how could you let guys go over your head to Barnett? And he just looked at me and he said, well, Bobby, I was there 8-9 months. He said, I took about $100,000 out of there. Some preposterous figure. I mean,
right.
Money he made at that time was about 3 times more than I'd ever made in a year. So I said, well, I don't blame you. I said, I'd let him go over my head too if I was getting paid that kind of money. So
yeah, no kidding. Sometimes you learn when to just shut up and take the paycheck.
Yeah.
Not that Harley was ever going to be walked over, but he knew when it was right time, I guess. And certainly can't really judge Harley Race of all people in regards to how to make some money here in the wrestling business. So he certainly did it his way for a very long period of time as a wrestler and then a manager, clearly as a booker. He did a lot there in the business, did Harley. And that's a fun, you did share that story before, but it's definitely worth repeating in regards to that. And at this point, though, we're going to wrap up the Florida show this week, Bob, but I encourage everybody to send in any questions they might have at this point in time. We're going to do a little kind of hybrid episode, I think, next time, in case there was somebody we didn't touch on. Maybe they could send in a question. Hey, we want to hear a little bit more about, for instance, we haven't talked a whole lot, which is odd, about Oliver Humperdink, who was all over the Florida territory for a very long period of time. So maybe you have a couple Humpy stories or something like that. Guys, just send in any of your questions, wrestlecopia@gmail.com. You can DM me over on Facebook or Twitter. Let us know, and you can title it Ask Bob, and we'll try to answer some Florida questions is what I'd like to do, but any questions are totally fine because your time here as Booker is coming to an end. We'll touch on that at the beginning of the next episode, and we'll talk about global wrestling upcoming. I know there's a lot of people out there really chomping at the bit with questions and interest in that global wrestling promotion that you upstarted there with Dr. Red, and we'll talk about that next time. But before we close up this week, Bob, I do want to hit once again on the Tregostes Hall of Fame.
Yes. We're talking about a week from this coming Thursday, right?
Week from today, kayfabe.
Yeah, it starts the Thursday, Friday. It's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Yep, July 17th through the 19th.
Yeah, I asked. I want you to give me a second here. The guys that invited me down, the Smart Marks that invited me down to Fort Lauderdale and treated me to dinner, they were really, really, really nice to me. And I asked if they would give me their names so I could say them on the show. So if you don't mind, I'd like to mention that these are a group, they call themselves Smart Marks. I've said that in my estimation, because they've had 160-some episodes of at least 145 different wrestlers. Some guys have come back once or twice that they've had dinner with and asked any kind of questions they want to ask. I think they got to be the most knowledgeable group of guys about the wrestling business in the world. But their names are Big John, Dan, Greg the Cable Guy, Jimmy V, and last but not least, that gentleman I was in contact with that handled most of the stuff, Robert Mitchell.
Okay.
So I wanted to mention those guys because I told them I would. Okay. And again, You go to a convention, and that's great. You're getting paid and all that, but you're one of, like, say there's 50 or 100 wrestlers there, all kinds of things going on. It's not that you're not important, but you certainly don't stand out. Maybe if you're Flair or Hogan or whatever. But if you're just one of the boys, especially someone that's been retired as long as I have, then you're no special deal. Well, when you're at this dinner with these guys, you're the star, and they're your audience, and they're paying for everything and paying you to be there. And to me, that's special. That's really a sign of respect. I want to thank them for it, and I appreciate what they did for me and what they've done for all the boys that they've had in there. And so I did want to mention that. And again, folks, please come if you can. Come to the Waterloo, the Trago says Hall of Fame at Waterloo next Thursday. It's the 17th, 18th, and 19th of this month. We've got some great people being inducted. Baron von Raschke's going to be there. He comes every year. He's going to get a special award this year. I'll be there. Please, if you're a fan of the show or if you hate me, you can come up to me. As long as you don't smack me or anything, you can come up and say, Bob, I think you stink, but I still listen to your show. I'll probably say thank you. And I guess an autograph is out of the question, right? But anyway,
you got a lot of your friends and former counterparts and things of that nature attending the event. I'm just looking through the list again. Of course, Jerry Briscoe, Joe Malenko, Sergeant Slaughter, Ron Simmons. My gosh, just look at all the talent. Eric Bischoff's going to be there. David Crockett, Les Thatcher, Thunderbolt Patterson, Tony Gurria, Edge from the WWE, now Cope in the AEW, Dr. Tom Pritchard, Greg Gagne, your buddy, Baron von Raschke. Axe and Smash Demolition will be there. So Bill Eadie's going to be in town, Bob. So that's going to be fun.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And
so
what you should know out there, folks, is that these guys aren't hiding away somewhere. At the museum, we're walking around, not with a troop of people behind us, a posse. A lot of us walking around in ones or twos or by ourselves, and we're approachable. I mean, it's not like, hey, stay away. It's a meet and greet every day. People can walk. I enjoy it when people come up to me and say hi. And boy, I used to hate your guts. By the way, I still do. No, they usually don't say that, but it's a nice way. If you want to meet any of the names on the list of people who are going to be there, you'll have a chance to meet them, shake hands with them, have a picture with them, maybe have a meal with them.
Yeah, maybe even have a piece of pizza, grab a drink. There's a lot going on over the course of 3 days there. You guys can go check it out. Yes. You can go to nwhof.org. That's the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, 303 Jefferson Street, of course, in Waterloo, Iowa. It's coming up July 17th through the 19th. It's going to be a fun time. 3 days of old school wrestling talk for sure, and reminiscing and just having a great old time. I encourage everybody to go out. Again, that all access pass, only $140. I encourage you to purchase that because you're going to save about $35 if you're not going to pay for everything individually. So totally worth the price. All access gets you everything for all 3 days. Only $140. Again, you guys can go over to nwhof.org, or you can call 319-233-0745. So that's what we got here for the Hall of Fame. Looking forward to hearing your stories coming out of that one, Bob. As we wrap up this week, just want to thank you again for another fun episode of the Wrestling Stoop. We'll be back. Next episode's going to drop the day you'll be in Waterloo on the 17th. So I'm looking forward to hearing the stories on the other side of that. But next week, again, encourage everybody to just send in your questions. I'd like to keep it Florida-based, but again, we'll answer anything here on the show. So send it in and title it Ask Bob. We'll do our best to get all of the questions in next week. But for now, we're gonna wrap things up. I want to thank you again, Bob, for doing this with me.
Well, thank you, Ray. Without you, it wouldn't be possible, and without you folks out there, neither Ray or I would be here. So thank you out there, and please stay well.